Welcome to Design Notes. I'm Liam Spradlin, and recently I talked to Kevin Barry, the developer of Nova Launcher. For those who don't know, Nova Launcher is an incredibly popular launcher replacement for Android, with more than 10 million downloads. Its prime unlock key is number 16 in the top paid apps in Google Play right now. Kevin's another developer that I've worked with for a while, but it was cool to sit down and kind of go over some of the nuances of designing and managing a product of Nova's scale. We talked about deciding when to add or remove options and settings, how to take inspiration from Google to make a stock plus experience, and even what launchers of the future might look like. Let's get started. And so I guess the first point that we'll kind of start off talking about is obviously Marshmallow's coming up. It's getting pretty close. I think we're like 2 weeks away from launch at the time that we're recording this. So there's obviously a lot of motion on the launcher that's been happening, and of course we've been paying attention to that. So I guess first I want to ask, how do you decide which features from the stock launcher to adopt or not adopt or adapt?
So mostly many users of Nova want kind of the stock plus experience. So they want the stock launcher, which is now the Google Now launcher, and then they want to be able to customize it, remove the search bar or add a different search bar, or increase the grid size, those things. So it's really hard for me not to incorporate something that the stock launcher has, because then people just feel this is missing, and we get a ton of support requests for it, and it's a void that Nova's not filling. It's not stock plus if it's missing these. So most of the things that the stock launcher includes, I offer at least as an option. With Marshmallow previews, we saw the first preview had the different app drawer. It had, it was just 3 icons wide. It had the letters down the side. That was a case where if Google shipped that in the final Marshmallow, Nova would need to include it. But it was actually in the preview, and then it was removed from the second preview, and it hasn't come back. So in that case, if I would have rushed to include it, which I considered it'd be great press to include it before Marshmallow was released, but if I rush to include it, then it's included, and then Google doesn't even use it. Users would be less interested in it at that point. But then I have it, and it's very hard to remove features from an app like Nova, because users get upset. They're using it, it's configured their way, and they don't want to see an update change that. They want to see an update add things that they can play with. But if they want to keep what they had before, they don't want me to force a change on them.
Right. So have there been any cases where a feature wasn't adopted at all?
Code-wise, definitely. What comes to mind is the widget preview cache. So when you're browsing the widgets in the app, in the widget drawer, you see those previews. It's a lot of work for the launcher to gather those. It talks to the system's package manager. The package manager looks at all the apps installed, sees which have widgets, and then tells the launcher, okay, you can get it from this app and this app and this app. Launcher queries each app individually, asking for that preview image. And then the preview images, they can be all different sizes. So the launcher has to scale it and clip it, and then it can finally display it. And you might scroll through that list very quickly, and it's in ICS, people might remember the widget drawer was just incredibly laggy. So obviously caching makes sense. And so in Nova, I actually did it in Jelly Bean, and I was using it a certain way. And then I think maybe they did it in Jelly Bean 4.3 or in KitKat, is when Google actually started doing widget preview caching. But the way they're doing it, they're using a database, and it's a lot more work to put it in it. They're not properly locking it, so sometimes the previews get distorted. And so I used this for a little while. I thought, oh, this is their implementation. Some of the code's a bit cleaner than mine. I'll go with it. So in the early Materia Nova betas, I was using Google's version of the widget preview cache, but then I was just seeing the performance wasn't there. It had its own bugs, even if the code felt a bit cleaner. So I went back to my old method, so that users don't notice unless they notice it's faster. But it's a case where I'm not using that, even though it's provided in the launcher. Design-wise, like things that users are likely to notice, it's a lot harder for me to not include something. But one thing that comes to mind is the crosshairs on the desktop. Google initially introduced these in the ice cream sandwich launcher. So when you're dragging an icon over the desktop, it shows kind of a little grid. And then they removed these, I think in KitKat, but maybe it was Jelly Bean 4.3. And I kept them because I feel they're quite handy, especially if you have a bigger grid size in Nova, or now with Nova's subgrid, where you can place an icon halfway between cells. it's really handy to have that guideline. So I've always kept those, even though Google decided against them.
Yeah, so I guess that leads into kind of features that are adopted, but that you change for the better. And just having that balance between, I guess, fixing or improving them, but in a way that most people are going to enjoy, like to the point that it can be the default option.
So an easy example of that is the new search bar. Google changed their logo. They give this great colorful search bar that some people really like, and it clashes with a lot of desktops. A lot of people like the new logo, but they don't want Google's colors clashing. So it makes perfect sense. Nova, of course, should offer the colorful search bar logo because some users just want that. They want the stock experience. But the default is the monochrome grayscale icon because it's simpler. It doesn't clash. So it's a very minor change, but it's easy to give users the default. They can change if they want, but it's better for Nova users than the colorful one for most users.
And I guess making the decision between fixing something like that and making the fixed version a default option versus fixing it and making it the alternate option, like how do you kind of weigh that?
That's hard, and that's something that I'd like to have more analytics that tell me, if most of my users are changing some setting, then I should change what the default is. I shouldn't make users need to go into settings. But it's also hard because for some settings they're for advanced users, and even if the default makes more sense, it could confuse a first-time user. So sometimes there is that if a user has to go through the steps of entering settings and finding something and turning it on, it at least prepares them a little bit more for that feature. Like for gestures, I give you some default gestures, but if I required two-finger swipe to open Nova settings, no one knows that. Whereas if you go into gestures and you set it yourself, you know it exists. For a case where Nova's not offering what the stock launcher offers, not offering exactly what the stock launcher offers, is the grouped widget drawer. We actually had it first. We had we grouped the widgets by app, scrolls vertically to scroll between apps, or you scroll horizontally within an app. And then at Google I/O, we saw Google released the M preview with an app drawer or widget drawer that was very similar to ours, but a bit different. The differences are minor. We like ours more, so we're sticking with it. And users aren't requesting, at least not yet, they're not requesting an option to have the stock Google style. That's a case where I'd be against adding an option for that because functionality it's the same, that you're scrolling two directions in both of them. They're displaying the same amount of content. The order of things is a bit different. We put the titles beneath, they put the titles above. Some of the colors are a bit different. But an option for that, it's confusing for someone to see, okay, this is grouped vertical Nova style, this is grouped vertical Google Now Launcher Marshmallow style, and then what happens when Android N comes out and they change it again.
Right.
So I feel there'd be little value in adding an option to perfectly mimic the Google style widget drawer. But if they'd come first, then maybe we would have felt that it's not worth designing our own that's notably different if there's not much more to gain functionality-wise.
Right. And I think from what I can tell, the main difference that I noticed, both as a user and as the person who helped out with the vertical widget drawer, is just ours is full screen and theirs is a card, basically. So
yeah.
Not necessarily an appreciable difference.
But we did debate about that. We were saying, we want to have the fast scroll thumb there. We want to show a peek of the edge of the next preview widget, so it's scrollable. And there's just not a lot of room when there's a card.
Right. And I think, I do think that putting the fast scroll at the edge of the screen is a lot easier to get to. But but that aside, getting kind of deeper into options, I guess. We talked about kind of supporting things as options that die quickly, kind of like the app drawer from P1. But what's your kind of philosophy on kind of the just making an option thing? I've seen a lot of people who have a specific use case that they want to do, And it's kind of like, why don't you just make it an option? Like, you can just put it in settings. But how do you feel about that?
So obviously Nova has a ton of options, so I do that to a certain extent. But every option you're adding it's a little bit of technical debt. So like if I add an option, even if it seems completely trivial, it's more code for me to test against. And right now that might not change much, but then a year from now I'm adding some new feature and it conflicts with this, and maybe I don't even realize it till the beta, and then it's a harder fix, but it's out there. I need to do something. So I want to be very careful when adding options. It's very mentally easy to decide I'm just going to add an option. It's a couple lines of code to make it optional on whatever, they won't worry about it. But then you're dealing with it for a long time. It's very hard to remove an option because users get upset about it. So you need to balance between adding an option where users are going to get a clear value, it makes the app better, and the downside where every additional option and setting is making the app a little bit worse, that it's overwhelming for a user. They go in, there's so many options, and some of these are really important. Changing the icon size or something that's a lot of people want to do has a clear effect right away. And some of them, remember position in the app drawer. Many people don't even realize that the position in the app drawer resets sometimes. You're on a different page, you open a different app, you press the home button, now you're going to be back at the first page, it kind of resets. But if you remember position, it keeps you on the third page or whatever. That option's, some people really like it. Don't worry, I'm not planning on removing it. It's not in danger. But a lot of people don't even know it's there or care about it, but it's taking up space in settings that's distracting them. And we all the time we get emails from people where they're thinking they're reporting a bug, but they enabled some option, they didn't understand what it meant, or they clicked on it by accident or something, and then we have to tell them, go into settings and disable this. That's what this feature, that's what that option is for. So it's hard to balance just making an option versus something that you want to support long term.
Yeah, and I guess there's kind of like a certain amount of predicting the future in that too. Like you might get to a point where, I remember when Google launched the new maps, when Google Maps kind of relaunched with the new web interface and everything, there were tons of like very specific features that people had been using that were suddenly gone because they kind of did house cleaning, I guess, of taking out a bunch of features and then slowly gathering data about which ones had to come back and which ones can be kind of pushed off.
Yeah, that's another thing. You don't really know if you can get away with removing a feature until you do it. So one case actually where in Android, starting in Android 4, the app drawer and the widget interface were combined. That you had tabs at the top of the app drawer, and you could tap on apps, or you could tap on widgets, and they're both in there. And then in KitKat, Google separated them. And initially, Nova still had very clear ice cream sandwich and jelly bean roots, and I still had the widgets in the same app drawer. And it was hard for me to move them out because that's so much was designed around them being together. With Nova 4.0, Materia Nova, I embraced modern Android and separated them. And I knew some people are going to say, I just want to have the widgets back in the app drawer. And I considered making this an option. And I wrote some code, and I did have I did some testing of doing that, but I never released it. And this was a case where I was thinking, okay, I never finished the code. There was, the animations got messed up, could crash sometimes if I don't remember various things. But it was something I could have finished up. But then I'm committing to allowing widgets and apps to be in the same drawer. Now, if I add a new animation other times, I need to test it when you enter the app drawer, you exit from the widgets, or you enter widgets and you switch over to apps. It's more testing there. And then actually the grouped widget drawer, I know for a fact that would not work with the current code if those widgets could exist in the app drawer. So that I was guessing that it was going to cause me problems down the road if I just make that an option. And then before we even finished the Nova 4.0 betas, it definitely would have been an issue. So I'm glad I didn't introduce that option, because I guess that's a feature I removed. It used to have apps and widgets together, but I'm glad I didn't just make that an option, because it would have made the group widget drawer much more difficult to do.
Right. And I guess this is something that I'm always interested in, but just, having an idea like that and then actually working on it and finding all of these pitfalls that you probably didn't think about before you actually started implementing it. Thinking about the cases of you enter one way and exit another, enter the other and exit the first, just predicting those problems and being able to identify where those are going to be.
Yeah, and some of it's just luck, that you're guessing this is going to be an issue. You don't quite know why, but you're right. And frequently it's just bad luck that you thought, oh, this is easy, and it's not. But that's, the users get really excited when launchers have updates, new features are added, new animations and things. But they don't like it if you don't have enough options. Some of my competitors, people complain, it's good, I just wish they had, the remember position option or the, reverse wallpaper scrolling, and they're relatively little things, just make it an option. But you can easily start just making everything an option and then later realize, now I can't do this new feature I was thinking of because it just completely conflicts with these options. So I either need to, gamble on this new feature that I don't know if people are going to like, and I'm going to break these old options and remove these old features to do it and upset people for that. Whereas if you never added them in the first place, some people are, I wish I had that option, but they're probably using the app anyway. Then you add this great new feature, and then they're happy. It's quite tricky.
And have you ever kind of discussed a feature that you haven't released yet with users? Because I feel like of all the apps that I've worked on, I feel like Nova has one of the best communities of testers and users and people who are just enthusiastic about it in the first place. So getting their feedback is probably important.
Yeah, but it's also dangerous that if I post to the Nova beta community, say, hey, what would you think about a feature that did this? Then it's hard to not do that. People get excited, people read too much into it. So I have the private alpha where I have a bit more freedom there, where I can talk about things and these people understand that I'm not committing to anything yet. The public beta, it's kind of, that's a case where sometimes, if I wonder if maybe a feature could be removed, I could remove it in the first beta and see how it goes, and then with all the complaints about people thinking it's broken or whatever, then I realize I really need to add this in. But sometimes things can be removed and no one notices because no one was using them, or virtually no one was using them.
And I think that's what makes the Nova beta community so powerful, is that it's big and it notices.
Huge. Yeah, and the diversity of devices there, that it's tons of people in custom ROMs, all these crazy devices that don't pass the Android CTS, and they're not supposed to have Google services on, but someone hacked it in, or they're just sideloading Nova, and so it's frustrating that I'm getting all these crashes, trying to figure out the top crash in Nova right now is from some analytics that I don't use, that some service somewhere is taking my APK, adding these analytics and sending out to users somewhere and crashing. And I can't trace it because the next day or something from exposed or from a custom ROM. And, it's very hard to find the limits of what's in my control and what's out of it. But it's great because if I release to the beta community, if it doesn't crash for the beta users, it's not going to crash for the release users because it's a big enough group and they're such a diverse, crazy group. So I really appreciate the beta group. I would not be comfortable doing a release straight from private alpha to public release, stable release. It'd be great press, good for sales, but it would crash, I'm sure. Right. The public beta gives me a great safety net.
And so there are a ton of these weird circumstances, like device configurations and just quirks from even manufacturers and stuff. So how much does that factor into I guess specialized coding that you have to do to get around these things, or design around certain issues that are created by things that you're not in control of?
It is frustrating, but it can be kind of fun too. That I'm glad phones are small because I have 50 different phones, and it's some of the appeal of getting a new phone is kind of lost because it's just, oh, it's more work for me. What did they break this time? But it's also fun to see, oh, this is interesting. LG does this on their lock screen. Oh, Samsung did this in the launcher. So I get to explore what they're doing, and I need to explore what they're doing because often it's breaking things. So there is, like, I try to code defensively that I want to make some assumptions about what exists at the system beneath Nova, because it's for optimizations or for just for otherwise I have to write way too much code if I'm assuming that nothing is safe. But I want to be defensive enough that if something is, if there's a chance this might break on some other system, try to code around it ahead of time, or at least log, if some impossible error happens, log it, because it's probably going to happen on some Samsung device somewhere. And then I can get a sense of that and try to hopefully work around it. The workarounds are something where, I spend a lot of time like debugging. The one today was Huawei released a update where they merged the SMS app and the dialer app, so it's like 2 different tabs. This is the Huawei P8. I don't have the device. We heard from a user. The problem is that now Tesla and Red puts the same, it treats the missed calls and SMS the same because it's the same, they're within the same app, but there's 2 different app icons in the app drawer. So it's, the way the API exists to query what the default SMS app is, but it just gives you a package name. It doesn't specify the full component name of what exists in the drawer. So I'm saying, okay, if it's a Huawei device, then do this additional check and okay, loop through all of them. If it looks like, if this is SMS and this looks like it's probably the dialer app, skip it. And I test the code by, changing it so it doesn't check if it's Huawei, obviously, and I test it on Nexus or something, but I can't actually test it without getting a P8, which by the time it gets here, I've already released this and heard back from a beta tester. So it's interesting to have all these, if Huawei, if Samsung, if LG, and it's a pain, and it costs a lot of development time, but it's fun too. It's the nature of Android, so right. So I don't mind it too much.
Is that ever a threat to performance, or how do you manage to keep it so quick, even with all of these built-in? There
are in ICS, hardware acceleration was still relatively new, and it was bad on Samsung devices. Not the Galaxy Nexus, because that was Google's drivers or whatever, but on the S2, which was basically the same hardware as the Galaxy Nexus, but it shipped initially with Gingerbread, and then they updated it to ICS. So initially, like, opening folders was, there's an animation for opening folders, and on the Galaxy Nexus it would be pretty smooth, and on Samsung it would just, it either stutter or just take a long time. And yeah, that's a case where it's down in the hardware acceleration level. Like, I can't write new hardware acceleration drivers, and even if I could, I'm not going to be able to run on them in the kernel level or anything. So what I was doing there is, I don't think I was looking just for Samsung devices. I was assuming this is also going to happen on an LG device or HTC or something. So I just timed the animation, and if the animation didn't start within 100 milliseconds or something, then I assumed this is the specific case. Samsung was like, it would take just a second to create a hardware layer. So if it didn't happen within 100 milliseconds, I'd skip that stage of the animation and go to the next stage. So the animation wasn't as nice, but it felt much faster than it would otherwise. Since ICS was quite bad, KitKat and up, or especially Lollipop and up, it's not as critical. There are cases though where if I'm querying something from the system, I'm getting a list of all the apps, then I can have specific cases that are problems on certain devices, and I have to find them. So I try to, frequently I'm testing something, and it shouldn't matter what device I'm testing it on. I'm changing the color of the search bar. It doesn't matter if I'm on a Samsung device or a Nexus device. But I'll have one device in front of me that I'm throwing the code to every so often, and I try to switch that out every hour or something. So I'll be using a Nexus for a while, switch to a Samsung, switch to HTC, and that just gives me a chance to find other issues, like maybe, hey, this is a lot slower here, and then I can investigate further. There's also Square released a library, Leak Canary, and so it's really easy to have memory leaks in Android. There's the context object, which is the God object. It's like your activity, which is the current screen. That's a context, and it's needed by many things in the system. And like if you rotate the screen, you're going to create a new activity. And if you keep that old context object, the one for the activity from before, now you have two activities running, and they're in memory. One's not even running anymore, and they can be quite huge. And so it's important in your own code to avoid this, and it's a very common error. But Nova, I've been incredibly careful about that. But I was still seeing lots of out-of-memory errors, and some of it's, Nova has widgets, Nova has themes. Like there's some things where it's hard for me to control, even if everything's working properly. But there's also cases where like Samsung introduces a memory leak, or HTC or whoever, and so Square's library Leak Canary it can find these for you, and they have a database of leaks that they know about it's an OEM's problem, not yours. But so reading that and actually trying to reproduce the ones that Square kind of says, these aren't your problem, don't worry about them. I do worry about them. And so it's hacky code to try to work around it, but it's like, okay, when I'm done with this activity, then use this nasty reflection code to reach into the Samsung objects and find where they're finding my activity and clear it out or replace it with something else. So that's performance in a different way because it's memory, but that's an area lately I've been working on a lot of finding all these device-specific things, and that I really need to test directly. I don't want to blindly write code to fix that because it's easy to break something else or to not properly fix it.
So I guess spinning off from kind of adapting to different platforms and devices and everything, more about Marshmallow. There are obviously a lot of changes coming with that. One of them being runtime permissions. That's probably one of the biggest ones. So I guess what are some areas that Nova is dealing with that? And also, like, what do you think about runtime permissions and just how developers will handle that?
Yeah, so I like the runtime permissions. As a user, I like it. I imagine most users are going to like it. As a developer, it also doesn't impact me that much, and so my users are going to, they're going to be on Marshmallow early, and they're going to appreciate that when they install Nova, it doesn't request any permissions right away. The runtime permissions that Nova needs are the call phone permission and the write storage permission. Call phone is actually one where it's an issue right now that people see call phone when they're installing Nova Launcher, and they're like, why does Nova need this permission? Are you going to call my mom in the middle of the night? And of course not. The reason Nova needs this permission is because you might add a shortcut using under widgets, contacts, there's a direct dial shortcut. And you might decide to add this so that you can have your own button on your home screen where you want to call your home. And that's, if you actually take those steps, you completely understand why you would need the call phone permission. But if you are never going to do that, you don't want the launcher to have that unnecessary permission. So with the new setup, when you install Nova, there's no permission. If you actually add that direct dial shortcut, then it prompts you and it makes perfect sense of what it needs it for, and you're happy to hit allow. Storage is a bit harder. Nova really just needs write external storage for making a backup, and you can always make a backup to a different location. But I also need read storage in some cases. And so that's mostly for when Nova's interacting with another app and the app is kind of behaving the wrong way. So one example is wallpapers. Chris Lacey of Action Launcher commented that Dropbox returns a wallpaper that it's a path on the SD card. So it just assumes that the launcher who's setting this wallpaper can read from the SD card, and if you can't, you get an error. And so in this case, what I need to, some file explorers do it also. I think maybe Astro. So if you as the user are setting a wallpaper, you want to choose it through Dropbox or Astro or something, then it comes back to Nova, then now I need to pop up a dialog saying, can you give me permission to this? If you hit no, I can't set they hit no, then I'm just going to show an error that the wallpaper couldn't be set. They have to choose it again. This time, hopefully, they hit allow. So that's not ideal, but it's not too bad. Another case is widgets that I don't know a popular widget in the wild that does this, but I'm sure if I don't handle the case, I'd hear about it quickly. Some widgets want to load a image from the SD card, and they just tell the launcher, here's where the image is, load it yourself. And if I don't have permission to read from the SD card, I can't do that. And so there's just a Google Now launcher update today. I haven't tested, but the previous build of the Google Now launcher for these kind of widgets, if it didn't have storage permission, it just would not load the image at all. So the widget would be broken. And I don't want the widget to be broken, especially it'd be confusing for users that if they happen to have made a backup and granted write external storage permission to Nova, then the widget would work properly. So it'd work for half the users and not the other half. So what we're doing in Nova now is we put a little badge over the widget with a little error icon, and hopefully you're curious, you tap on it and it explains this widget's trying to load a image from the storage. Nova needs additional permission to be able to do this. And then you're like, okay, I'll do that. You hit okay. And then we give you the system dialog where it actually says allow Nova to access storage. And you hit allow again. And then the widget will reload properly. So that's a double prompt, which I don't like. There's one dialog followed by another. But it's a hard case that for direct dial, that's a case where you're dropping the shortcut. You tap on the shortcut and it says, do you want to allow Nova to make this call? You understand, without any additional prompting, you understand what's going on, that you just tap something to make a phone call and it asks for permission to call. With this, there's not a way for us to put across the widget without completely blocking the widget. Hey, I need permission for storage because the widget's loading an image from the SD card. It's too much. So we just show the little error icon, and you tap it, you get the explanation, hit OK, and you agree a second time. Because the system doesn't let us put any additional information in that dialog. It has to be just the system's dialog.
Right. And I feel like for Android developers and designers, I guess, this is kind of a new fun challenge, because I feel like we've been spoiled so far by having at install permissions and not having to kind of deal with both asking for permission in a way that makes users feel comfortable and also degrading gracefully if they don't give permission.
Yeah, and it also created an incentive to not remove permissions that I can't think of. In Nova, there was some permission I was using for a while, and I stopped needing it. But I just had it wasn't too important of a permission. It wasn't vibrate permission, but it was something like that where users basically don't bat an eye at it. But I had no incentive to remove that permission because it wasn't really going to make users more comfortable. It was a permission no one really cared about. And if I removed it and I need it again later, then later when I release that update, it's not an automatic update. You're prompted, you review the permissions again, then you might ask about the call phone permission that's always been there, but just because they think maybe that's the new one. So there was these incentives to front load permissions. If you ask for all the permissions at 1.0, you never get prompted again. And that's bad. It's a bad user experience. You're just flooded with too many permissions at once. But as a developer, the manual updates, that's really bad. It's you lose people when there's an update waiting in the queue. They have to decide to update. Maybe they just decide to uninstall. And then when they do update, they're seeing the permissions. It feels kind of intimidating. What are you trying to pull over me? So I'm pleased with the new experience and with the runtime permissions. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how users react and how developers react, especially because we still need to support Android prior to Marshmallow for the next couple of years.
Right, and I think definitely the permission system. The old permission system, which I guess is technically the current permission system, kind of made things a little bit scarier than they needed to be, only because they weren't clear. There was no opportunity for the developer to tell you what they were doing with that unless you wrote it in the description, which people probably won't read. So yeah, I do feel like this is better in that sense. But I wonder, I've noticed that in the Marshmallow previews that I haven't had any dialogues from Google Now Launcher for any permissions. Is there a special case for that?
Yeah, actually, I haven't noticed Google's apps doing the permission prompt at all, really. Some of them, I think, have the old Target SDK, so they don't need to. And some... Yeah, so the Google app, I see it already has microphone, contacts, location. It just doesn't have camera. And so I might have changed some of these, but not all of that. So I don't I don't know how they're handling system apps, but they sometimes Google doesn't test things as well as they should because they believe the launcher comes shipped as a system app and has these extra permissions and things. Whereas I mean in that case that's true because the Google app comes on all official Google Android phones, even if Google Now Launcher isn't installed. Once it's installed, all it's doing is activating the Google app, which is a system app. So they always can treat things a bit different. They don't have to deal with the real world that third-party launchers like Nova have to deal with.
Right. So basically, it is getting the permissions because it's attached to the Google app.
Well, yeah. So that's installed with the system, and they grant at least some of those by default. I just gave it a try on the latest Google app, which includes the Google Now Launcher. If you do a direct dial shortcut and you disable the call phone permission, then the launcher just says app now installed when you try to launch it. So they're not currently handling that case, and they're not handling the widget case either. They might be handling it through the Google, like if I say, okay, Google. If I say, okay, Google, make a call, then they might be prompting me for the permission. I haven't tested it. So they might just be, the launcher team might not have added these permission checks, but hopefully the search team has.
Right, and I think you mentioned if you target a lower SDK than 23, then you can get away with some things like the permission to draw over other apps, which is a huge, like pretty much the design element of Facebook Messenger, for instance, has been elevated to above dangerous, meaning that users have to go to a separate screen to like purposefully enable it. But it seems like that would encourage apps or companies like Facebook to continue targeting an old SDK just so that they don't have to freak out the users with that.
Yeah, for the runtime permissions, not draw over other apps. For the runtime permissions, as a developer, you have an incentive to support the latest SDK and you don't get the permissions at install time because then from the Play Store, the user's not prompted for any permission, so that's a better experience. And then if the user revokes permission, which they can still do for an older app, you can actually test that case and prompt them or something. So you can have a better experience and you have more control over the permissions if you go ahead and target the Android 23 Marshmallow. Draw over other apps is different. That's you can't prompt for it anyway. You can just open the dialog and open the window with the list of all the apps and hope the user toggles yours correctly. And if your target is less than 23, you just get the permission without any scaring of the user. So I feel there's very little incentive to target 23 if the core functionality is to draw over other apps, even if it's a minor functionality that, and I would be, which this might be Google's point, as a developer, I would be discouraged from making a new app that's functionality required draw over other apps. It feels like this, they might just lock this down further. It's going to be a bad experience for users where they aren't, plenty of users are not going to enable your app, or they're going to get confused, or they're going to think that it's lagging their system because they have this extra screen there. So I do think this is kind of Google's way of trying to shut down apps like that. But the way they're doing it is making apps like Facebook, like why would Facebook want to make Facebook Messenger target anything but 22? If they go higher than 22, they have to have this really awkward experience to get their core functionality to work. One idea that you and I talked about earlier, that a way Google could incentivize you to target 23 is they could have their own walkthrough. Is if you target 22 and you need draw for other apps, the first time you launch the app, Google could present an interface where it says, this app requires this permission, go in here and enable it. And you as the developer have no control over it unless you target 23. This way it's a bad experience across the board, and it's a better experience if you actually target Marshmallow.
Right, so there's at least hope that you can craft a better experience for yourself on 23.
You can you can explain yourself,
right.
Whereas if Google did it, it's just raw, go in here and enable this.
So if Facebook Messenger, I have to imagine that at some point, if they continue to target 22, then that would be problematic at some point. Like what kind of problems could that cause, if any?
So Android's kind of weird with the API levels. There's the minimum SDK, so that's Nova's minimum SDK is 16. That means I can be installed on Android 16, which is Jelly Bean 4.1. I can be installed there and I work properly, and I can't be installed earlier than that. Then there's the Target SDK. That's what we're talking about here. That's the system will treat your app different depending on what this is. So some things like there's backwards compatibility modes. If you target Donut or something, it'll assume you don't know about certain densities, and it'll do a different kind of scaling. But if you target a more modern one, it knows not to do these things, which can make your app look bad. Or sometimes it's performance related. If you target a later one, they know you know how to handle hardware acceleration, so they don't force software acceleration on you. But then there's also the compile SDK. So that's when you're actually writing the code, what kind of code you can include. So there are plenty of apps that are compiling against 23 or 22 modern Android, but their target SDK is lower because they're trying to get some backwards compatible behavior. One example is widget padding. Is that if you target ice cream sandwich or later, you get an Google kind of forces an extra 8 dp of padding on your widget. Whereas if you target earlier, you don't. So widgets like Zuper or minimalistic text, they don't want that padding because they want the user to be able to create a full frame widget. So last I checked, they're still targeting older, honeycomb or gingerbread. So Facebook conceivably could compile against Marshmallow or Android N or whatever's current and still have their target SDK at 22 Lollipop. And they could do that for years. I imagine Google's going to continue to try to incentivize targeting modern Android, or at least 23. But Google's always kind of been cautious to keep Android backwards compatible, which in some cases I feel they shouldn't have. That like ice cream sandwich ships with all those old ugly gingerbread assets, and Marshmallow ships with those old ugly gingerbread assets. And in gingerbread, there's no consistency anyway. Samsung, HTC, LG, they all had their own skins on top of it without the same, they had their own ugly assets. So I feel Google could have just used Halo for all of that. But they didn't. They wanted to keep the full backwards compatibility, so it looked like, you can run some apps that look like gingerbread on your Marshmallow phone and, have fun. So Google doesn't want to break that backwards compatibility. That's probably why they didn't remove the draw over other app permission. Instead, they just made it more awkward. But it does seem they need to, and they want to start encouraging developers to focus on modern Android. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
So do you think that draw over other apps from, besides the angle of encouraging developers to not develop with that feature in mind, do you think that it's problematic in some way that would deserve the kind of scary treatment?
It is a security flaw, but it's there's other issues too. One pet peeve of mine is if you're in the Play Store and you hit install on an app or buy an app, it prompts you for your password. It feels like the more secure option is to say, yeah, prompt me for the password and do it every time, not wait 30 minutes or whatever. But personally, I say never ask me for my password because I'm not worried about, someone else using my phone and buying an app that I wasn't expecting to charge. I'd be more worried about a malicious app popping up a fake dialogue saying, okay, you can buy this app, enter your password, and I put my Google password into it. And that can be done with the draw over other apps permission, but it could also be done with a transparent activity. Your protection kind of is that it'd be hard to know when the user presses that buy button. But with accessibility service or something, I imagine it'd be possible. So draw over other apps does have the security issue, but there's transparent activities also have the issue. Or even you could do a full screen. Many users wouldn't notice if a full screen activity popped up that asked for your Google password and had something that looked roughly like a screenshot of Google Play in the background. Many users would be happy to enter their password there, and then they do, and then the dialogue is still there. They'll just enter it again and never think about it, but they could have just leaked their Google password somewhere. So I see the concern about draw other apps, but I also see it with any background service launching activity could do similar. There's also it can be a bad user experience with draw over other apps. That like there's the apps like Screen Filter, which they let you dim your screen more by just drawing like a transparent black over it. But then these apps, potentially a malicious app could, present the device manager screen or something, or a runtime permission screen, and cover it up so you think you're hitting, okay, I want, the free 100 coins for this game, but you're actually, granting permission to wipe your device to this game. And so Android has security built in to prevent, if anything is drawn on top of those dialogues don't accept clicks. But then what happens is people run these screen filter apps 100% of the time. They try to sideload an app and they hit install and nothing happens. And then they email me saying, I'm trying to sideload Nova and it doesn't work. And I'm like, disable your screen filter. So that's been a bad experience for a while. And I think in Marshmallow they give a warning now when that happens rather than just ignore the touch. So yeah, draw over other apps. I feel it's an old, like the API has been there since very early Android and it hasn't really been changed. And there's very minimal documentation for it. Like it's mentioned, there's the permission there, but Google doesn't provide any examples for how to use it. I don't think they really expected developers to use it much. I think it was from when Android was a different kind of operating system and it's a leftover. But I am surprised they didn't remove it. And when Android Wear first launched and they didn't allow you to touch on clock faces, then like Wear Mini Launcher, I believe that's using draw over other apps. I did a test that I never released, but where I had a watch face and then I had a system window on top, draw over other apps window on top of it, and then I'd get touches in that window and I'd form to my watch face so that like I could put a view pager in my watch face and you could scroll between different screens. You could have a launcher built into the watch face or whatever, even though they were trying to block that. And the surprising thing to me was that they shouldn't have had draw over other apps allowed at all on Android Wear. Like that was kind of why I'd be hesitant to release something like that, because it just seems there's no good reason for that on Android Wear. It's barely supported on proper Android.
Right.
What's the future of a feature like this?
Right, and that is strange because I feel like Google's design approach with Android Wear is very delicate. It's very light and not something that you would expect them to allow more layers to be stacked on top.
Yeah, and they removed other APIs, so it's not like they were saying we want full Android here. So yeah, I was surprised that they didn't remove that.
Right. And
or block it.
It is interesting that the kind of like nobody was using draw over other apps. Like I don't think I used an app before Messenger that did that, and then Messenger came out and Facebook had done this like really cool thing with it, and then all of a sudden there was this explosion. Everybody realized that you can draw on top of other apps, and then all of these cool things started happening. But then I guess Google was like, wait a second.
I think part of Google likes it, that they're like, yes, see, Android it's an open platform. You can do these crazy things, and any company, it doesn't need to be Google, can introduce some new feature. Facebook can come up with chat heads, which were good innovation, and Facebook can do it on the Android platform. So I think part of Google does really like that, and I think part of Google kind of feels, wait, we want to control this platform a little bit more. We want more security. We have a bad reputation about that already. Like this is kind of crazy what we allow apps to do. Maybe we need to change it.
Right. Like now that we have a few great experiences with this, then we can kind of like reel it back a little bit.
Or yeah, they can come up with proper APIs to do something. Yeah, back in the day there was Wave Launcher, which I saw recently. There's two of them on the Play Store now, the old abandoned one and a more recent one, but they mimicked the Palm Pre I think with Palm Pre, you'd like slide your thumb up on the screen and then there'd be a wave of apps and you'd hover over one of them and they'd launch it. So that was pretty cool, and that was back in Gingerbread. And then there was some like they'd have a little thing on the side of your screen and you'd slide it open and bring out a little drawer with your apps or something. So there's some interesting launcher apps, but nothing like Facebook that was kind of targeted at normal users. That was just a normal consumer app, not just to launch other apps or something.
Right, and a big brand too doing something that kind of made a splash.
Yeah. Facebook has, like they experimented with Facebook Home also, that like at that time there weren't big brands doing launchers. Google didn't have Google Now launcher back then. It was just the Android launcher. And I was excited for Facebook Home that, like, obviously I wasn't going to use it. I'm going to use Nova, but it seemed that Facebook Home was potentially going to expose all these people to the idea, hey, you can change your home screen. And then if they did change it, then they'd just say, hey, how can I change it to be, you know, I want more than just Facebook there. I want to, you know, customize everything. And then they could have found Nova. Yeah. But it doesn't look like Facebook Home really worked out.
Yeah, it was, that is a good point though. Making the discovery that this capability exists, like from the average user's perspective.
Yeah, and likewise with chat heads, I think that even if some of these other ideas about how to use Draw or other apps, even if some other developers came up with these ideas, I don't think they'd quite have the same popularity, because people can say, oh yeah, get link bubble. It's like chat heads, but for the web browser. Whereas if you didn't have chat heads there, it's kind of like, oh yeah, link bubble, it's neat. It lets you, you know, draw a bubble that gives you the web browser. It's harder to explain to someone.
So I guess treading into completely different waters altogether, something that I've been thinking about recently is like, I don't know, I guess just like the general landscape of launchers and what you think will be, I guess, a big transformation in the future. Like, how will launchers look in 5 years or 10 years?
It's been interesting to follow the market that, like, when I got into Android, there was ADW Launcher, Launcher Pro, and Go Launcher, and maybe there's a handful of smaller ones, but like those were the big ones. And like you could see, there's the different design philosophies. ADW was the default launcher on CyanogenMod. It was completely open source. Launcher Pro, that was kind of trying to mimic the HTC Sense, because at that time stock Android wasn't that desirable. It was HTC Sense was desirable. And then Go Launcher, which was kind of just copying those at that time, but you kind of had this sense that Go was shady and it wasn't gonna work out that well. And then kind of ADW and Launcher Pro were kind of starting to fade away when Ice Cream Sandwich is coming out. And so then that was just a great opportunity for Nova to fill the void of a custom launcher and be based on all new, you know, take advantage of the hardware acceleration, take advantage of Google's latest code. And Ice Cream Sandwich was just so different than Gingerbread. And then Go was still strong at that point, but that's when it was doing more of, you know, hey, check out our other apps, hey, check out our themes, hey, you know, buy all this stuff. And that was starting to annoy users. Now I feel there's a lot of launchers like Go Launcher, and they're you know, if you look at their download numbers, they're huge, but they're not really discussed on Android Police or on Reddit's Our Android. So I think they're not really seen by the Western power user. Like, they're not interested in it because they see that they're kind of scummy apps that are, you know, they're pushing ads or selling data or something. And then there's also kind of the venture capital backed launchers. So like, you know, some of these launchers have really big money behind them, and people kind of say, oh, you know, they have all this money, and they're not, you know, they don't even offer these things Nova offers, but they're trying to do something very different. They're trying to, you know, be very smart launchers that are going to, you know, they're going to predict what you need, like Google Now, but third parties.
Right. So like AV8 that eventually got bought by Yahoo.
Yeah, they had a lot of venture capital money. They get bought by Yahoo now they have, you know, presumably a good amount of money going into it. And it's ambitious what they're trying to do. They're trying to, you know, change the way you use your home screen, not just by customizing it, but by, you know, predicting. And that's a hard problem. So it's interesting to see that, because it is a threat to Nova that, you know, if AV8 gets really great, then it's harder. It'd be easier for them to add customization options mimicking Nova than it would be for me to add a prediction engine that could compete with, you know, one that works properly from a huge company. But so far, I think it's kind of been kind of like what I was saying Facebook Home might have been, where it's users they hear about launchers more, and they can try a couple, and then Nova fits a lot of them really well, so it works out for me. And then there's the other, you know, launchers like Nova, where they're, you know, a single developer, just a couple developers, and they're focusing on customization, giving the user a good experience, and, you know, a paid version, not trying to do ads or anything. So to actually answer your question, I don't really know about 5 years from now. I think we're going to see a lot more. There's going to be a lot more competition and a lot more of the company competition. The indie developers doing it, I think, in a way that's going to get harder and harder. That in the Gingerbread time, now I didn't do a launcher in Gingerbread time, but Widget Locker was based on the Android launcher code, so I had a sense of it from that. Gingerbread was a mess. Like, there's a lot of diversity in devices, but it was smaller. Android now is really big. There's so many devices, and there's so many ways people want to use the devices. So I think, like we were talking about, that Nova has a lot of things to test against, specific devices. It's hard for any developer to get started and to make a launcher that just works if they have to handle all these things. Whereas, a company can do that, or an established launcher like Nova. I'm making good money from Nova, so it makes sense for me to invest by getting all these devices and invest the time and fixing the bugs on them. But it's intimidating for someone trying to start.
So do you think that things will move more in the kind of suggest direction? I think launchers are interesting because it's hard to imagine devices running without launchers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was, I think it was in my Reddit AMA, someone was saying, what do I see the launcher of the future being? And I was saying, I think, ideally you shouldn't need a launcher. And that's bad for me, but, a launcher is just a tool. And if your phone if your phone was intelligent, you don't need a tool. You don't need to tell your phone, I want this app, by searching for it and clicking on it. You should just be able to pick up your phone, and it knows what you want because it can read your mind or whatever. So yeah, the best launcher interface would be one that doesn't exist, where your phone's just doing what you want of accessing the other apps. There is the aspect of customization that people want, but that could exist in a different way, or it could exist, how it presents the information. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, it doesn't need to be predictive, but I think that the venture capital backed launchers that are ambitiously trying to change the way we interact with devices, they're going to shape a lot of the landscape. Some of them are. Most are going to, fizzle out. People aren't going to use them, but some will work, and Google will continue, working on Google Now Launcher. And for me, I'm hoping that there's still plenty, like if they're having these powerful APIs that users really want that prediction or whatever it is, I'm hoping that that's something I can tap into rather than having to try to make my own.
Right. And I think that'll be interesting too, because like you said, once the phone can read your mind or do some other form of magic, it'll, that will really change the face of how you use the device. But until then, there's going to be a lot of middle in the story.
And the customization aspect that, like, you want to show off your phone. You want to, show the cool scroll effect when you're going through, and people will be like, oh, wow, is that the new iPhone? So there is an aspect where even if the functionality, it does just read your mind, you want something you can demo to people. Or, when someone's trying out a new phone, they always swipe between the home screens and, like, are they trying to measure the lag or whatever? But it's just, you want to fiddle with it and get it, feel it, hold it. So there is, even if it could just launch, you want to use Reddit and it just launches Reddit for you. You just see the lock screen, and then that you want to control that wallpaper on the lock screen, or you want to control the color of the Reddit app or something. You want something that you can make it yours.
Right. And I feel like, particularly in the Nova community, people make their home screens kind of design pieces almost, with the level of icons and wallpapers and the tweaks that they have and everything. And I think you're right. Like, the interactions that we have with mobile devices are really intimate considering what they are. So people have, like, a connection to interacting with that. And I think even in a world where things are perfectly predictive, there's still a desire, at least until we move on to post-touch or zero interface, that people are still going to want to play with the device, basically.
Well, and, like, for post-touch, Google Glass people mostly said the interface was good. It was really interesting. It was smart. It was good engineering. It doesn't look good to have something hanging off your head, but it was also maybe not personal enough or something. Whereas Android Wear, which is it's a lot less ambitious than Google Glass. But you can change your watch face. You're gonna wear it on your wrist, and the hardware itself looks fine, and you can choose it. You can customize the watch band. You can change the watch face. It's more personal, and I think that is. I mean, you look like a dork with Google Glass, and that's a big reason that's hard to take off. But I think they can connect more with a watch than the minimal glass interface.
Yeah, and I think the philosophy. Well, first of all, I think that Android Wear definitely learned a lot from Glass in terms of like interface and just how people want to use things. But I think also part of the philosophy is like not connecting you to the device, but actually having the device be as out of your way as possible. So like it was designed specifically so that you wouldn't be looking at it all the time, but that you could. So the idea was like connecting you to real life versus on Android Wear. The goal is still to be fast because you're supposed to be able to glance at things, but you're more connected to the device, I guess, if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess it's also like the personal assistant thing where like Siri is supposed to have, some attitude and tell you jokes and things. And then Google wants to be more like the Starship Enterprise where it's just, computer do this task and it does it. And I can see the appeal of why people would want to have some jokes or feel they don't want to say okay Google, they want to say Jarvis because they want to
right.
feel it's more than it is. But I think there's also the danger there of Apple doesn't really want to invent an AI that's going to tell you jokes. They want to focus on productivity, and if you can connect, there's the uncanny valley where you can connect a bit, but not enough that you actually fool a person into thinking that you're talking to a person, and then it just feels kind of awkward. Like the phone systems when you call and it says, okay, you can speak your number, and you're just annoyed because it's a robot on that end, even though you can communicate in English.
And you still feel like you have to say like 502. Yeah,
you talk different when you're talking to a machine,
which is interesting because I think that's something that Google's trying to solve. But I do agree with their philosophy that the search assistant isn't really your friend. I think that trying to build in the kind of conversational personality and sass into a digital assistant is a losing game because you're never going to get quite there unless you completely shift your focus, which would be a mistake.
And I don't think we really want that like sometimes I find it easier to ask someone a question of how do I do this, and they can explain it to me, but sometimes I just want to Google it, and when I Google, I'm not asking a question, I'm saying Android SDK and permission, and it's I'm not going to send a message to someone saying that because they're just like, what, you can't even bother to send a proper sentence to me and you want me to help you out. But Google doesn't care. So I think we do communicate with machines different than we communicate with people, and we want to because it can be quicker. If the machine, we're not worried about insulting them or anything, and we're not, we can be shy about what we're gonna, I'm an idiot, I forgot how to do whatever. I don't want to ask my friend that, I'll just Google it and just do it quickly.
Right. And I would say that typing in the words of what you're looking for is quicker than coming up with the full sentence and using, words that ultimately won't impact the query. So yeah. I think that wraps it up for this episode, actually. It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, it's been good talking to you.
And I'm sure that we'll have more episodes together, hopefully in the future, once launchers are our friends and completely predictive.
Making the jokes.
Yeah, exactly. So cool. All right. Well, yeah, until next time.
All right. Bye. 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 Bye.